at the summit. NGOs, I mean, international NGOs and member states, including donors, and then international organizations. Never mind, I mean, grassroots and affected people. But just from those three, it's very clear that the most interest and the biggest push and the most expectation in terms of the robustness of the follow-up comes from the NGO community by far. Questions around accountability and like the questions that you asked. I mean, I have to say, this is the first time that someone asked me a very specific question like this. Should we design a separate program? Would it be, I mean, how do we incorporate this into our activities? And some do this, but as a conversational item, asking for advice. Then I think some of the international organizations are a bit more sort of, I'm not saying on the fence, but may have put forward as part of their commitments things that many of them would anyway do or planning to do and incorporate. I spoke to Sandra this morning and said many of their commitments have been put into their medium-term work plan, and WFP is putting a lot of them into their work plans. So that's where they are. And then on the member states, quite frankly, it's all very, very diffuse. I mean, you have among, let's say, the donors, some who, I mean, the model that we presented, they would have liked to see more robust engagement, including by WHS and leadership, almost saying this is what you do, blah blah blah, and putting capacity in. And then there are others and say, listen, we would have preferred we had the summit, have a nice celebration, and then move on with life. And then among member states from the global south, and I think that is sort of a good segue into the presentation. The simple fact of the matter is that this commitment to action that you have with these 3,000 plus commitments is very sort of Northwestern heavy in terms of organizations and member states committing. So a lot of countries from the global south are, to the extent that they weren't, some of them not so thrilled about the summit because of lack of intergovernmental processes and so on, because that's what they're used to. Many of them are really lost. They don't exactly know what is some of the jargon, even questions of work plan and blah, blah, blah. When all of this, they're not part of the industry, and that's why they have more difficulties relating to this. But there is a lot of interest. And so if you look, for example, at the commitment to action document, these 3,500 are essentially commitments that we have received in writing through that commitment platform, registered with us or sent to us sort of manually in writing. But what happened is that, particularly from the global south, a lot of those countries, not being so familiar or not having capacity or whatever, seeing that as a sort of a bit of an impediment, this whole impersonal web-based thing, they then came to the summit and made commitments orally. So it's an enormous exercise, actually, to go, and we're still not finished with that part, to be honest. You have to go through every single webcast several times, and then you have to go back to them and say, did you mean that? You said that, but did you mean that? Would you want that to be registered as an oral commitment? And quite frankly, we've had enough to do with the 3,500 already to get to that point, or how many, ever many it is. So but it is important, particularly with the global south, if I may say so, to capture those, or not because we feel that 3,500 is really not enough. We need to get to 4,000. But because those are the entryways then into conversations with the global south to get them more involved in the follow-up. And so that's really where I see, if you look at the constituencies where people say, so naturally, sort of by way of opening, I think a lot of, you were there, and that's what I said, and naturally I think the NGOs right now, for those of us who want the summit to go further, are our strongest allies. And that's why it's important, we're going to talk a little bit maybe later also about our expectations for the pact, how we can make that happen, how we would want you to be involved a little bit, sort of almost from a client servicing point, that we really put features on there that not only what we need from you, but also what you would get out of it, that we design this together. We have some initial start, but this can still be designed. Remember, I think you may have asked the question, how can we participate in that last time? And that for us is still something that we would like to explore further with you. So that's basically where we start. Maybe if you,
Yeah.
can I just basically just on overall, basically how this is going to move forward. There are four prongs of follow-up that are outlined in the Secretary General's report. One is this platform for action, commitment, and transformation. PACT, and it's called PACT because we couldn't come up with a fancier name. And so if any of you over time thinks there is a much better name, we're also happy to adjust that. But that really is, I think, the central piece of the follow-up, because this is where the self-reporting would happen. This is a little bit of the traffic police, not traffic police, but the traffic regulation in terms of interest. So if you want, ideally, and we try to show this a little bit at the IC working group. We don't have it here right now, but you would have basically, I have it somewhere here. Catherine, do you have the PACT side? You would have basically three. There, is you have three sort of pillars here. One is the agenda for humanity, explore commitments, and then discover initiatives.
Yes,
so you would click on either of them. Let's say explore commitments. You click on that, and you have basically organized by core responsibility. One of the 5 core responsibilities. You have the drop down of commitments. You can also then click on one of the policy shifts, and you get those commitments that were made to one of the 24 policy shifts. And so we've organized some of that already. So in the future, what we would like to facilitate is if someone, let's say CARE, would want to know what's happening on the disability. So you could now pick up the phone and say, Hans-Jörg, do you know what's happening there? And I say, I don't know, but I can call Finland, and then Finland calls someone else and so on. Or if that self-reporting, that information, I mean, I just told Catherine before, reporting is a very heavy word, and I don't really like that. But what really it is, it's information exchange, or so on initiatives that you're taking to advance some of these policy shifts. And so without that information, we will not know what's happening. With that information, ideally, you could click then in the future and say, hey, I want to know what's happening on the disability. You go into this, you click on the disability, and you see, this is the next meeting is there, and this is what Finland and partners have done. I'm very interested in this. I would like to join that, be a champion of this, or co-champion, or a partner, or join that initiative, even though you may not have made a commitment in the past on this, or one of your other organizations, participating organizations. And that's where you know then how to get in touch with people. So it doesn't require you going via us anymore. So it's a very sort of interactive tooling. So that's the central piece in a way of the follow-up. The second thing is then an annual report that would basically provide sort of a relatively short synopsis analysis of what has happened over a year in terms of implementation and taking these forward. And again, that goes to what you said, the tightness of all this, of the outcome. We could, in a way, say, if someone asked you, what do you want to achieve over 5 years? What do you want to get out of this whole summit? So one answer would be to have all 3,500 commitments taken forward and blah, blah, blah. This would set in motion a monitoring effort and mechanism that none of us, and we could put all of OCHA onto it and would probably not be able to follow this. So that's not practical. To follow up and say we want to achieve the agenda for humanity, that's too elusive. That's nothing. So really, what you have as the two options is those 5 core responsibilities and those 24 policy shifts. And ultimately, we found that the 5 core responsibilities are very useful to package and continue to frame things, but they're not specific enough, basically, for people to understand how to move things forward. If people want to be champions of this and move things forward. So we believe that at the center of both the pact and the annual report, and therefore the further rollout of the World Humanitarian Summit, is the 24 policy shifts of the agenda for humanity. We've sort of put that in this wheel and have a few handouts, and then also in a bit more organized around these 5 core responsibilities. Maybe you can share this with your members later. So if you look at those 24 policy shifts, what you would like to demonstrate over the next 5 years, so through every single annual report, is let me just pick one on reinforced local systems. So your localization. So what you really would want to demonstrate over 5 years, that since the summit, we have really made progress of building up local capacity, funneling more funding and so on through local capacity, having them differently involved in our coordination structure. So that's what needs to be measured. That means those of you who work on commitments around localization need to share some of that information with us, so we can put this or through that website, so that we know whether something is happening or not. That really is the idea. So I think the 24 policy shifts here, or whatever we call them in the future, transformational actions, so that's really what we want to achieve over time, and there through that the agenda for humanity. What the gap, as someone said the other day, between reality today and the aspirations underpinning all of these 24 policy shifts, to narrow that gap. Obviously, there is political will in there, and there's end statelessness, and they're very ambitious things. It's a bit like the SDGs, but it's about narrowing that gap. So that's the pact and the annual report, and then the third pillar is continued sort of engagement, outreach, understanding raising. I just mentioned, for example, this group of the countries from the global south. I mean, the starting point is for us that at the summit we had 180 member states. 180 member states, the largest member state meeting, a summit ever outside the General Assembly in New York as a single event. So those 180 came 2/3 at ministerial level or above, 120 ministerial level or above. So clearly there is some interest, and many of them spoke at the summit and after the summit positively about the summit. So that's different from how the G77 as an intergovernmental negotiating group feels and positions itself within the UN system, but individually there's a lot of interest. So what we have to achieve in our outreach and understanding over the next years is that we reach out to some of those who were there, who spoke, and we can tell from the roundtable who were very sympathetic to certain things and made very positive, even signaled policy shifts in their own countries, and bring them in. That means we need to get them used to where we're going, to the whole summit, agenda for humanity, blah, 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 blah. There's some of your organizations, civil society organizations at the local level, at the regional levels, that this is not just a New York-based or Geneva-based, a headquarters heavy exercise, that they will have roles to play. So that means that already is an endeavor that cannot be done by 5 or 10 people in OCHA. This needs to be a multilateral effort. I mean, that's where we need you. That's where we need your communications and advocacy capabilities and capacities. That's where, quite frankly, we hope, not all in one go, but over time, we create champions for each of those policy shifts. Not just one, they can be clusters of champions, they can do, so that you also multilateralize the ownership for these policy shifts a little bit. And on some of them, they're very natural. I mean, end statelessness, very clearly, HCR will have a key role to play, but there are also others where member states have a clear role to play, or local organizations and so on. I mean, the localization and near, for example, you know, and some of these things. I mean, that's desirable, and that continued engagement is necessary. Will require quite a bit of advocacy, outreach work, and so on and so forth. And then the last pillar, the fourth one, is really this stock taking in 3 to 5 years. Now, Stephen, when he speaks, insists very much that he would like to see such a stock taking meeting in 2019. That's in 2.5 years from now. And as we know from the World Summit preparations, that's not a lot of time. Now, whether it is in the end 2019 or 2018 or 2020 or 2021, I don't know. We put 3 to 5 years for good reasons, because it's also partly, you know, as you all know, we have a transition at the United Nations. Antonio Guterres, Commissioner Guterres, has now been appointed as new SG. In his vision statement to the membership of the United Nations, to the member states, he actually had a strong emphasis on the World Humanitarian Summit and said he wants to build on it. We've reached out, and obviously we have Kyangwa now working with him, and she assured me that this was on his agenda, as it is on the agenda of the PGA, the President of the General Assembly. You know, so I think this is not just going to go wither away if we get these people in, but if we overwhelm the system by prematurely moving towards another high-level meeting, and then it becomes, quite frankly, the same story again that I feel we've all suffered from for a while, that we're playing catch-up with our own ambitions, then it's not going to be good, you know. So I think this needs to come at a time when we have something to stock take, and quite frankly, over the next year, I think the challenge will be to ramp this up into an endeavor that people know what their place is, what their role is, what they want to share, what they want to do, and so on, and that they're also in the membership, donors and others, is greater levels of enthusiasm and buy-in again into this. And that usually comes with, if a train starts leaving the station, you know, there are member states prefer to be not only waving at the station, but beyond that train. So that's going to happen. But it's up to all of us really to make this worth our while. So focus, and that's my last word again, is not on the 3,500, but what we ultimately want to achieve through the 3,500. The 3,500 will help us advance some of these policy shifts. And that's why on the PACT website, this clustering is important, how several of these commitments actually speak to actually very similar ones and initiatives. So they can be bundled, they can be brought together and actually support these policy shifts. But what we also say is where people, where a commitment was expressed through the creation of an initiative, that initiative, OCHA is not the owner of that initiative. So Finland, for example, asked me, that's why I mentioned the disability. I mean, a few months ago, I said, listen, what are you doing? How are you taking forward this disability or Gordon Brown's education initiative? Well, my question to him is how are you taking it forward so that I can tell people how this is being taken forward? You know, it's those who created initiatives need to be the primary champions and take this forward. And we had a bit of a discussion around the grand bargain, you know, and this discussion and fears, as much as it's good that we're very invested in this, we must make sure that just because there is so much attention now on the grand bargain, that this doesn't become the World Humanitarian Summit follow-up and everything that there was, because there were many other important aspects of it that the grand bargain doesn't really look at in enough detail. But what is also necessary is that those who have, I mean, NEAR and others, that those initiatives now also focus and create the political momentum and the processes that are necessary to take this forward, and that doesn't always have to be as heavy and elaborate a process as we have on the grand bargain, but there needs to be a way forward. There needs to be an expedient. There needs to be, how do we get this funded? There needs to be, if NEAR wants to monitor all the commitments, for example, that were made around localization, then I would assume that requires a certain trust and also financing and whatever it is. So these things need to be taken forward so that people know this is happening. And obviously we can offer advice and so on, but I mean it will not happen that if we are the owners of 3,500 commitments.
Thank you very much for this answer. I'm going to open the floor for questions, so maybe James, you can see if there is some question online. But just before that, I mean, a lot is based on basically willingness of all of us to really engage in this process. You mentioned that the NGO community has been engaging a lot. I'm sure the NGO community will continue to engage. What I'm a bit afraid of is a lack of momentum from quite a lot of member states. So I would like your reaction on that. What we hear, what I hear, it's basically, and I'm going to be provocative here, WHS is becoming a no-go word somehow. It's a word that we should not use. We should better use agenda for humanity. We should better speak about issues, about topics which have come up from the WHS. But WHS as such might not be as sexy as it was a year ago, for instance. So it's good that we can all be on board, but it all means not only NGOs and especially member states. Yeah. If we look at Istanbul, all the discussion on displacement, the discussion on IHL and so on was definitely difficult. So how do you see that, and how can this be actually solved? OCHA team is going to be a small team following on that. I don't know what's going to Guterres be doing and so on.
But can I just, take this first before some others come in? I mean, I don't think we should get too hung up on this. I mean, look, the momentum that the World Humanitarian Summit was never a goal in and of itself. It was not to say we're working for 3 years to have a World Humanitarian Summit and have some discussions there and then nothing else happened. So the World Humanitarian Summit itself was a stepping stone and a tool towards change, towards transformation. And the words that we all use and the expectations that we, in drafting this commitment to action document with a 3,500, I think it was Laurie who said, it was actually interesting. There was nothing. There was not a single commitment. We're committing to continue exactly the way we've been doing things. It's all fantastic when you speak to people. What do we need to change? Everything works, But the funny thing is, there were lots of things for change and transformation, doing things differently in 3,500 commitments, but there was not a single one that says, we really think everything works and we commit to doing this more or fund what we have right now more. So there is this change momentum. Now, the momentum that was created for the summit to come together and have a well-organized, reasonable discussion with lots of buy-in. And mind you, that we had fears at some point that we wouldn't get enough member states or member states from the global south to this. All of this in the end worked out. So that's why the summit was had a lot of momentum, was a success, but not as an end point in and of itself, as the point of departure, as Stephen says it, or a beginning of something else. And to create the momentum now for that change and transformation to be really serious, not only in words, requires also a different type of political investment. It's not the same momentum. It's not that we just could assume that seamlessly from the summit and everyone goes into it. It also didn't happen around the SDGs and or any of those, or Sender or whatever. It's natural that there is a little bit of a drop off, and then we come up with the architecture. And so what I said is our sort of timeline is a little bit that I would like to be, by the time of ECOSOC next year, in a different place where we work over the next 6, 8, 9 months, really on providing that clarity, so that will also allow others again to come and find their place, and therefore be.
Can I just ask you whether you feel that you have the resources to do it with the?
It's not a question of resources. Look, some of the donors I'm least concerned about, because when we started this, the discussions around the World Humanitarian Summit, there were lots of donors who said, this is nonsense, don't do this. But then over time, there were many others also who felt that's exactly what we would be doing. But over time, some of them were driving the whole thing, and sometimes too much. They will come on board. If in 6 months, no one is enthusiastic about it, we might take a collective decision to just leave it at that, But I don't think that that's going to happen. But that is always an option. But my bigger concern is that we need to work with member states from the global south. And there, it's not that because, let's say, Russia and China have issues over the intergovernmental, non-intergovernmental nature of this, and therefore don't in resolutions now want to have the World Humanitarian Summit there it's a bit of tit for tat. You didn't want an intergovernmental process, so don't expect us to condone what you did by putting it into resolution. But I think the policy shifts, they're already in resolutions, are beginning to. That's what we need to focus on. So the success does not lie in how many times did you mention the World Humanitarian Summit or even the words agenda for humanity. The success lies in these policy changes and getting those through our own institutions, but also the normative processes. And there I'm more hopeful.
Thank you very much for that answer. James, any question on online? Anyone wants to?
So no one online as yet. So maybe we just continue in the room, and I'll let you know if someone asks.
Garrett from CARE.
So particularly for me, I think on the accountability, I have quite a different approach to yourself, Abraham, because for us, we've been very clear from the outset that the people who are going to hold us accountable for our commitments was us, basically. So all that's already happening. So, and several of you in the room are aware there was a Charter for Change meeting last week, at which signatories to that commitment submitted progress reports.
Which one was it?
The Charter for Change.
Okay.
So we submitted progress reports that were peer reviewed, and so we're already kind of holding ourselves accountable for having signed up to that. And I think where the pressure comes, as you say, Hans-Jörg, it's not about, these aren't WHS commitments, they're our commitments. And we expect, for example, on the Charter for Change as a big INGO to be held accountable by our partners for saying, well, you care, you said you were going to do this, and how are you getting on? So likewise, we expect to use the commitments that member states and UN agencies in particular have made to hold those UN agencies and member states accountable. So I think that's the way it has to work, is so it's for us as civil society to say, the UK, Germany, Sudan made these commitments and we don't see progress. Can you tell us how you're getting on? So I think that's key for how we maintain the energy. I think on your point, Raphael, on whether the WHS is a no-go area, I mean, it's definitely lost some of its kind of power, but also if we use those commitments, then it will regain that power. So if we go and talk to states and say, you said you would do this, we're not seeing progress, then that's how we give it back its power. I mean, I think one of my slight concerns, Hans-Jörg, is that UN agencies aren't necessarily reflecting some of the commitments they made in their behaviours, and I think that's a challenge for us. But again, it's up to us to use those commitments they made and go to say to them, here you go, you said you were going to cut down bureaucracy and everything else, and look, you've just added all these extra compliance requirements. So it's not, you're not doing what you said you'd do. But again, I think this is something that we can't expect OCHA or the UN more generally to do for us. It's something we have to use those, and likewise we have to be held accountable for what we said. Just coming back to the Global Policy Forum, for me it's basically how does that inform those processes, and also how do we offer leadership between the agencies that do have a clear vision of how we hold ourselves accountable to this stuff, and share that amongst the wider community, because I think a lot of agencies are struggling. And also one of the challenges with the huge number of commitments is that there's just so many of them. So we kept our number of clear commitments very small, precisely because we were thinking ahead on how we'd deliver on them. But I think it's also about, we will have to be a bit selective about which ones we prioritise for accountability and which ones we think is most important.
Thank you very much. For anyone around the table, Ibrahim from Intersas?
Just two brief questions. Please don't be too elaborate in responding. The first one is you say that we need to work with member states from the south. Not because I'm from the south, I'm asking you this question. Having worked in the UN for over 35 years, I never, even at one single point, attend any meeting of the donors where there were any countries from the south, including in countries where there was quite a bit of injection of funds from the south to those particular countries. That's one. So how do we work with the members of the south? The second thing is you talked about reporting, and on an annual basis there'll be a reporting that will kind of come out with what has been achieved or whatever. I'm talking about the 24 commitments and to the 24 policy shifts as well as the commitments. How do you intend to document these achievements? What do I do as an agency? Write you and said I did this, and then you would put it up. Is there any guidelines, any instructions that have been issued in this respect? Thank you.
And Martin, I just have just one more thing that you can just. It's the future of the regional steering group. This is something coming up often from a different region.
Yeah. Look, thanks for all the questions. Very good. Let me just start with the annual report because that's and Catherine can talk. Yes, there will be guidance. We're sort of developing a few thoughts. We're having conversations. We're happy, even maybe over the phone bilaterally, to follow up with some of those. Maybe if there is a list or so, Catherine would be happy to have a conversation with you. We want to get this right. I mean, without overburdening, taking advantage of the reporting that you already do. So it's really to keep, let's say, the additional bureaucracy workload as little as possible, but also for you to understand what type of information is more useful to us than not. And so I think the starting point, again, is what we would like. I mean, in my mind, we haven't really looked at a blueprint yet. I mean, in my mind, I should have said, there are two natural points at which one could do that annual report. The first one would be on the anniversary of the summit, which is around the end of May. Quite frankly, as that doesn't give us enough time. Mm-hmm. Secondly, it would be very cluttered around that time with the ECOSOC report and a lot of other things. The second and better point would be September, because also a lot of your annual reports will be out by then for the previous year. So let's say for the first one in 2017, your 2016 reports would all come someone out in the beginning of in the first half of 2016. So we can use some of that information as well. So very likely, decision is not necessarily ours and we haven't taken it, but very likely that annual report would come out in September. So the way I look at this is that there probably would be it would very much be around those 24 policy shifts and how we're getting on with that in a very broad way. So I don't need to have detailed reporting, with matrices and all sorts of on 3,500, when we would probably not even be able to reflect that and so frustrate you. But what we need to do in a way is to say, let's say localization, since we were on that, is something happening or is nothing happening? So that connects to something that I think is really important. You spoke about the accountability, and I mean, I think NEAR and CALC were the first ones who sort of mentioned that they would like to monitor thematic areas of progress. So CALC, for example, said that they would like to monitor all the commitments that were made around cash, whether they're moving forward or not. On local, in a broader sense, NEAR said they would like to take on this, and there are a few others who would like to do similar things. That I think is very useful. That would be a very useful input into such a report, because what we would like to do over maximum one page, probably even shorter, 3/4 of a page, you would want to say that train is moving. There is now, from first indications, I had a conversation the other day with Oxfam, and they said, look, it's really complicated. If you're serious about that, the staff that you hire the contracts that you do, all of this is affected by this whole localization thing. Not only how you funnel money then into whom and so on. These are complicated, but if people actually think them through and start practicing this is positive news. So basically, it would be sort of a synthesized progress report per 24 shifts. And if you imagine a page per shift, that would already be 25 pages. And then with all the write-up around it, you have something like a 30 to 40 page report, as an annual report, which I think is realistic and necessary. But that also gives you an idea of the level of detail or not. But that's important. And Catherine is happy to speak much more. But we're developing some guidance on this. I wouldn't say guidelines, but some guidance. But we also don't want to issue some guidance right now and then say everyone, hey, that we want to touch base with you before, so that the guidance already reflects a little bit our collective thinking. On the Global South outreach, and I agree with everything that you said. It's not easy, but that's why I think make it concrete. I mean, what doesn't work is to say, hey, our group is too white Western, and this business is seen as a white Western business, and that's why we would like to have 3 or 4 of you sitting on our meetings. They know that, of course, by now. But if we find some of these entry points, and I'm just thinking of Nauru right now, one of my favorite examples. Nauru was very interested in some of the natural disaster, climate change related things, where they would like to, they were very eager to be a co-chair of that. So go out and say, would you want to be a champion of this? Could you come on board? And so I think being a champion of some of these 24 policy shifts also enables, and by the way, not only member states from the Global South, but also some of the organizations that may be online right now, some of the organizations, affected people organizations from the Global South, because they can then also push some of their policymakers. And so I'm not saying that's a straightforward one-off conversation, but it means that is a group that I think we have to engage with greater focus than we have also probably before the summit. On the future of the regional steering group, the answer is yes. We want to continue those. We will build those into our follow-up. Our regional offices are very interested in this. The reality is that some of them probably have always functioned better than others. And that one also needs to reflect the realities of the summit in terms of liking it or not and being engaged in terms of the composition of some of the regional steering groups right now. And so that's a conversation that we now need to have, and we've started a bit with with our own regional offices and so on. And I know from Bangkok, for example, that they've really used, they've almost used this regional steering group even beyond Ultimate and Summer stuff for almost everything as a natural reference frame. So, long story short, yes, but in some places that may require a bit more re-energizing than in others.
Just on that point, I think it would be very appreciated if more clarity and guidance could be given at the regional level of how it's going to be moved forward.
Absolutely, and that's probably going to take a few weeks or months.
It might,
but I mean, as a general guidance, yes. I mean, the regional level is very, very important. In terms of also that outreach with member states from the Global South, and
before we move to the policy forum, I assume it's on a regional steering group. Sorry, first, Michael first.
I'm looking at the 24, and I don't think you're going to. Some of these you're going to have blank pages. Stand up for the rules of war. Address displacement. How are you going to handle the more difficult ones?
I mean, we could now go into the commitments. I mean, some of them may be blank pages, they may be shorter, others longer. But I mean, that's also where we then need to point out and say that's exactly so. The annual report needs to also provide that level of analysis and say here, as I did a bit of that analysis at the working group, where I said we already know in what areas we've received the least core commitments and the least individual or joint, sort of initiative commitments, and they are those difficult ones. So that is, we don't assume that by the annual report or because of the annual report, everyone says, yeah, I want to be a leader on sustaining political will and so on. That continues to be, but it's also to dismiss this now and say that's difficult, let's not talk about it anymore, that's denying ourselves sort of a tool to keep on needling others. You need to do more. So that SG's report also needs to then be a tool that points to these things so as to encourage political affairs, the Secretary General, and some member states to put more into this. But maybe was your question on the regional steering group, or
No, it was again stepping back on the
maybe we can
member states.
If we can just come back on
come back to that.
eventually.
Just on the global humanitarian policy forum. Look, I mean, it's more that we said. I mean, the global humanitarian policy forum, before even before really the regional consultations and consultation process for the World Humanitarian Summit started, we already had one or two of these policy forums where we had a lot of participants from the
So, can you just explain very quickly what was initially the purpose of this forum, and then
So the Global Humanitarian Policy Forum was basically to say we wanted to have around some of the policy issues that a few of us sit around the table, want to have a more global conversation, and so we specifically invited grassroots organizations and people from the global south into this, and then wanted to have a combined conversation. And so that became really also a trajectory into the World Humanitarian Summit, and many of the conversations that we've had over the last 5 years, I think, you will find reflected in the outcome of the summit or in these policy shifts. But so what we thought this year, rather than continuing to have interesting policy discussions, we would say, and it's interesting, it goes to our own work plan, which we're just now continuing. So I said, for the first time in a long time, we're not going to do any new studies and so on. I feel, quite frankly, that there's always something new, but I feel quite saturated, I have to say. And I think we have an enormous wealth of thinking now out there and initiative for change and direction of travel. There may be something missing, but for me, the focus right now is on taking what we have forward rather than adding more to it. And so the forum will have sort of a public part that will look a little bit at 46/182 from to the World Humanitarian Summit and so on, to honor this. I mean, overcoming these divides. I mean, this new way of working and so on. But then have, I think, 6 very specific sort of workshops. Sorry, I didn't bring all of this with me, but that builds upon, for example, I think displacement is one, localization is one, the new way of working is one. So that builds upon the commitments made and the policy shift proposed in the agenda for humanity, and says, so what is happening? How can we build on this and take it forward? And so that's our attempt this year, to already nudge this in the direction of the summit. And I think you will find this very similarly done at ECOSOC next year, that those side events will be used around those to show progress and momentum.
By the way, we had your team on the phone last week, and we will share with the group when the concept note will be officially finalized, and we can share it around and make sure that everybody can know about it.
And in terms of participation and shaping, but also, I mean, this is now sort of because in the shortage of time, how we see this being taken. There may be ideas that you have, and after this presentation, we're very happy to turn this into an even better tool in the future. Maybe just one thing again is, it's not only about states. There are lots of things among these 24 policy shifts and the commitments that have nothing to do with the states. It's up to us to do it differently. The new way of working, a new approach to IDPs, localization. I mean, lots of things. And let member states' attitudes. I mean, it's important, but let them not become some excuse for us not doing our bit.
We're going to take a last round of question and answer. I know Melissa from IGVA and Stefan from DRC have something to ask. James, anyone online? No? Okay. Melissa?
Thank you so much for this presentation, also your presentation in New York at the working group. It was interesting, the last part of the World Humanitarian Summit, the closing session, where the private sector representative said, we have a lot of commitments. We don't expect all the commitments to be realized. We expect the ones where people feel passionate to actually go forward. And you see a lot of passion around particular work streams, for example, the Grand Bargain. But as you noted, Grand Bargain is talking about efficiencies. It's not talking about the funding gap. And I still think we have a gap when it comes to talking about the funding gap. What is the process there? So I'd love to hear your ideas on where we could situate that, especially since the next Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, was one of the people who was involved in creating this high-level panel on financing, which had a report that wasn't only looking at efficiencies. I do think this this point on speaking out on violations is one area where you didn't have a lot of commitments, but where we need to find complementary routes to advocate for. And the last point I would make is I'm hearing a lot of references to the phrase collective outcomes. I saw it in the Secretary General's report on a World Humanitarian Summit follow-up. And I've seen it come up in 3 places recently. First, the workshop, this joint retreat on humanitarian development peace nexus. Many of the workshop participants were trying to think of examples of potential collective outcomes that they could work towards, and you saw a lot of struggle there beyond the SDGs or the MDGs. Where can we think of collective outcomes? We saw it come up in this discussion on activity-based or outcome-based costing. How would we actually fund or finance against outcomes rather than projects? And we've also seen it come up in some of the discussions around financing more generally. So I'm interested now that Stephen O'Brien is talking about one ecosystem, not one UN or one approach, but one ecosystem. Where is this phrase collective outcomes going in the context of follow-up to WHS? Because I think it's a great concept, but it's very hard to visualize how it will be implemented.
Thank you, Melissa. Stefan, for the last question.
I'm slightly embarrassed to follow up on your question because mine is down to a simple earth. I have mentioned it in the past.
Those are usually the most difficult questions.
Yeah. And I'm afraid I'm coming with one of those again. I have to say, within DRC, and I doubt we are very different to the other organizations, we lose tremendously out when we talk to the people on the field. For them, the situation hasn't changed an inch. And if I now send out an email saying that this debate will now move to the Global Policy Forum, I can see the eyes already rolling in the field. Okay, here they go, another one. For them, and I'm talking now very concretely with our colleagues in Nigeria, we just recently discussed internally, actually, what do we see now 6 months later? They cannot point at one single thing that has changed substantially in anything they have done before. They do now differently. And I sense that's where we are struggling. We are convincing ourselves here in Geneva, in our debates, at least in the NGO world that I am part of. We see some movement, we have room for engagement, the process is going on. But for the colleagues in the field, I would almost say zero has changed. Now, of course, we cannot exchange that Nigeria will change its policy, that the terrorist organizations will adhere to standards. The funding is suddenly there. All peace, love, and harmony broke out, all works. But just this here debate and absolute stagnation on the ground, that doesn't look right to me. So perhaps I am on the wrong end of the debate, but I'm just happy to pass that message on, and I can say I have mentioned it to you.
I think that's fantastic to finish with the last question related to impact at the field level. So I will let you answer. I might try to do some kind of conclusion first on Melissa's point, especially on the funding gap, and then on the impact on the field.
Now, let me start with that point, perhaps, and I'm really grateful for the discussion. First of all, clarification. We didn't say that the follow-up to the World Humanitarian will be moved to the Global Humanitarian Policy Forum. We just said that one forum that OCHA, or 2 fora that OCHA is sort of organizing, is this Global Humanitarian Policy Forum and the annual ECOSOC Humanitarian Affairs segment. And we are reconfiguring these 2 events to follow that line of thinking that I outlined before. How does it contribute or showcase progress? So now you may have, I don't know what, the annual ICFA principles, whatever big thing, and you may choose to do something very similar or focus on one and next year on another one. So there are different ways. I mean, it's more about forums in which this is being taken forward. And I think you're absolutely right that how does it benefit the field? There are 2 parts to this. There's the more immediate answer. Among those 3,500 commitments, there is, for example, there are commitments where I mean, one of my favorite examples, whether we now believe this is going to be implemented tomorrow morning or not, but is that Eritrea, for example, made a commitment to have refugees now more systematically included in their national development plan. So we now can say, whatever, it's not going to happen, or etc. Or someone starts having a conversation. You made this commitment. Actually, you made a commitment in writing, even. That can only go through the field level. So partly it is that we remind people in our field office again. They said that's what happened, and you need to do this. But then the more difficult thing is that if you look at, and that's why this is about those 24 policy shifts. Obviously, if we could already say after half a year, just because we had the summit, 6 of them have moved on, we would already be in a better place. And I totally understand. We have to, and we need to always take this as a test, the impatience of the field to see change. But if we had been maximally ambitious, we would have said, and if there had been maximal agreement among everyone, we would have said, the new way of working, the new approach to IDPs, we're getting this into this year's planning guidance for the 2017 field HRP guidance and the performance. But we haven't managed to do so. And neither is there unanimity around everything in the grand bargain, quite to the contrary, And so I think for some of this to take real serious traction in terms of change and transformation on the ground in the field, it's sometimes away from that, and it may take years, quite frankly, a few years. I mean, I am impatient on some of these things, but even if I match my impatience with theirs, it would still not be quick enough. So, what we have to make sure is that those processes that most immediately affect the planning and the rollout and implementation of people in the field, where we believe these are the most urgent areas that we do things differently. And if I look at what has come out of the summit, I mean, the themes that recur is localization. There's this divide, humanitarian development divide. There's maybe something on displacement. There are a few of these issues. So if we're really this impatient to see change in the field, then let's act on this. And let's unfortunately, a lot of these processes start off with planning and it is guided by probably in all our instances by headquarters or finalized and so on. But headquarters needs to now fess up to this change. And it's sort of in a more joking manner, what I and that's a general dilemma of the summit. The Protestant reformer Martin Luther, is like 500 years now old. So everyone talks about him and says he prompted a whole revolution, do everything differently. So we had all these hundreds of thousands of farmers in Germany uprising 500 years ago, and then he said, "Oops, I didn't mean that. I didn't want that." And so I feel a little bit we're in a similar situation that there was a lot of talk about change and transformation. It sounded fantastic, new world order and so on. But now that it comes down to it, and it goes to your own accountability, holding yourself accountable. Now that it comes down to it, it says, "Oops, that revolution actually means we need to do things differently." I say, yes, that's exactly what it means. And that's where we are right now, that a lot of these impediments that are now being put up, we say, but look, we're not undermining the humanitarian principles by, in protracted crisis, longer term, working differently with developmental partners. We're not, because it's not downtown Aleppo. In downtown Aleppo, that's exactly what we need to do. And anyway, it's a long-winded answer to, I understand, but there's also we need to be realistic and tell people, look, just because we had the summit doesn't mean tomorrow morning your world is a better world. But the point is more the other way around, because it's so bad and it's very likely going to get worse. And in some of those places, unimaginable, where it's already terrible, I mean, like Syria, some of the political parameters, if not acted upon very quickly, it could get much, much worse. So of course, I mean, that's not going to happen because of one World Humanitarian Summit. But that's why it was the right thing to have had a World Humanitarian Summit that puts out again how important it is to have political will, and now for us to say, how about, I mean, what you said before, how about the respect for the rules of war or humanitarian law? How about it? And pushing the discourse towards there is a right and wrong in this whole thing, you know, and it goes beyond the ICRC. Basically, talking, it needs to be a global campaign of everyone who feels that way to say there's a right and there's a wrong, and member states, including some among the donors, can decide on what side of the divide they want to they want to be. Now, on your questions around the priority commitments, I think that's the realistic way of taking this forward. Among all these 3,500, there will be some that will get forgotten. There will be some that we probably will hardly notice, where people have put commitments out that are very sort of geared towards their own processes, and they're already putting it in. And then in 3 years, they say, oh, we've been doing 25 of those already for the past 25, because they have some, and that's fine. Without, don't quote me now on this number, but if we have had, as I said this morning, the 3,000 last night, the 3,500 will naturally boil down to 35 that really make a difference. And we're not here to tell which 35 those are, and that needs to be. But the grand, in a almost self-select manner, there are probably some of those who will naturally gravitate to the fore, and then there are a few where we cannot just apply total Darwinism, you know, and say the survival of the fittest, because I mean donors have certain interests, but there are other things like around law that are very important that we need to continue to highlight, that not much or not enough is happening. But I think that's what is going to happen over time as a natural self-selection and gravitating towards some of those outcomes. But I have to tell you, a lot of the issues around inclusion for me, and there may be some repackaging, whether everyone just focuses on disability or you focus on a broader inclusion agenda, what that means for us programmatically. I think that's important. That's an important outcome, and which we need to take forward. Displacement, grand bargain, and so on and so forth. So I think that passion it's a good word that will decide in the end which ones will be taken forward. Speaking out on violations, I just said, for me, and I, as you know, pushed very hard through the IC working group. I've been discussing this now for 9 months with the ICRC and others, and I think we need to broaden this. And not that I'm saying the ICRC doesn't know how to do this, but it cannot only be the ICRC, and it's not just about interpreting international law. It is about a much broader choice that you make clear. We still have choices to do the right or the wrong thing, you know, and then on the collective outcomes, that's a very long discussion. But let me just give you a very simple example. So far, we've been dealing with humanitarian and development as two entities that are totally different from each other and therefore need to be connected by coordination, whatever it is. That doesn't even work for every organization like that. For many organizations, that's not really that much of a problem. But what we said is, particularly in these protracted contexts, what is important is, and I spoke to Ross the other day, if you take cholera, for example, in Haiti right now, you have 50,000, I believe, people infected right now, today. So their goal is in 5 years, whether that's achievable or being achieved or not, is in 5 years, they would like to have that at zero. So eradicated cholera in Haiti. So what you do is also in your programming, you don't sit today, we have 50,000, so we need to give them that. And then next year you hope that it's better, and then you give them a little less and so on. But you say in 5 years, where we would like to be is at zero. What does it take? What does it take, therefore, for, let's say, by definition, humanitarian organizations, what does it take to deal with those infected people right now? But at the same time, make it very clear to government, to donors and others, if we don't invest right now in water sanitation, we will continue to have those 50,000 or more in 2 and 3 or 4 years. So in the end, you just continue to give the same thing every single year, which is what we're doing in many places. So the collective outcome in that example would be the eradication of cholera in Haiti, and then what it takes and by whom to get this done. So there's ample room for humanitarian organizations to do their bit, but it's also to say not every year the same or accelerating. So it needs to be geared towards that reduction, and that's where a resident coordinator, in my view, or a humanitarian coordinator would have very different discussions now. You would say to the government, if you don't do this here in terms of policy, then the following will not happen. The result will be continue this. You can tell donors, if you don't start investing in water sanitation in year one, which is exactly what didn't happen in Haiti last time around, when the humanitarian phase was downgraded, the MSF press release to say, we're not getting enough money anymore because it's no longer humanitarian, but there's no money going into the developmental effort. So if you don't tie these two things together and use the collective outcome as an anchor for both of those communities, you will not instill that sense of urgency and clear goal in 5 years to the developmental activities. In 5 years, that's what you have to have done to eradicate poverty, and you will not instill that sense of you need to work towards sustaining your efforts into the humanitarian community. I think that's where some of this comes to. We can have a longer conversation about this, but that's on the collective outcomes.
Yeah, because this is for me a key discussion. We don't have time now. We might have to consider that, especially after the retreat of the humanitarian development.
I'm happy to come back.
Yeah, so let's park it for the moment. It's been more than an hour now, so I will just close the meeting.
And sorry, the financing gap, we'll see how that for me is part still of that invest in humanity. So we'll try to see how that connects with some of the policy shifts that we have. We haven't given up on this.
Well, what we do, of course, with James is that we're going to continue sharing information on what is happening on the post WHS. I think will be mainly information sharing, discussing on way forward. So the next step will be basically the humanitarian policy forum. We're going to try as well to share more information, and I'm sure some of you will be there. I think it's the 11th and 12th or 13th of December, something like
12, 13.
12 and 13th of December in New York. Yeah. Voilà. Great. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the one online.
And maybe those of you who have some ideas or inputs to the reporting, Catherine,
Yeah, it would be great to perhaps follow up afterwards, because we've already begun to develop the guidance. So it'd be really useful to get your feedback on that so that we can make it as simple as possible, but also get the information that's going to be not just useful for the synthesis report, but also going to be useful for you as you move forward and trying to keep other stakeholders accountable for the commitments that they've made as well. So we really want it to be able to play both functions while still being something that's kind of light and easy for people to use. So your feedback on that would be really useful.
And as soon as you have the kind of first draft that you can share, we can share it with our list and put you in touch with.
And also, I mean, I think the pack's useful because it codes all our commitments. You can then cross-reference and hopefully upload on there.
Could I just make a proposal? Since I mean, you've been now consistently interested in the pack. I'm not saying that everyone else is. We're trying to do in the margins of the policy forum sort of a bit of select. I mean, because you cannot have this conversation with 500 people. But so we're trying to bring 10, 12, 15 maximally around the table and say, what is it that you would still want to have? Maybe I can, on behalf of this group, I mean, get you if you come to New York or someone into this and say, what's your interest? I mean, but also how would you capacity-wise or technically want to support this, things that you could do. I mean, we're very happy to look at all of this.
Definitely. I mean,
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. My New York colleague,